Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joe Littell from the Office of Student Organizations and Activities at Northwestern, and welcome to this edition of SOA Chats, part of our series of workshops for the Northwestern student org community. As you enter as a participant for this event, please introduce yourself, share your first name, your role with a student organization, whether that's an advisor or if you are a student officer, and be sure to mention what student organization or organizations you are here on behalf of. If you don't advise a student organization directly, that's fine. Tell us who you are. Tell us what area of the Northwestern community you are here representing. And today we are going to focus on Wildcat Connection, a platform that Northwestern has access to support the student org community. So what we're going to share today is and please let me know in the chat if you have any trouble hearing me. I'm hearing some folks may have some issues hearing me right now, and I can always start the recording again if there's any issues. General tips for using Wildcat Connection, that's what we're going to cover today. I'm going to share some visuals and some general information about the platform, and we will also have a live demo focused on the manage mode, which advisors and student organization officers have access to. And then we'll wrap with any questions y'all have. We'll do our best to answer them as it pertains to using Wildcat Connection. And we also have some announcements to wrap up as well. So Wildcat Connection, believe it or not, is not software that I created. It's nothing out of the Northwestern IT office. This is something contracted by a company called Campus Labs, recently merged with another company called Anthology. They have a whole suite of software for college campuses. And right now, Wildcat Connection is the only application of theirs that we use right now. On Wildcat Connection, there are over 600 pages in the directory. Our focus today is going to be on registered student organization and fraternity and sorority life chapter pages. You'll also find some pages for campus departments. Sometimes specific programs or activities might have their own page on there. And there's also pages from TGS groups, other graduate and professional school groups, groups from Kellogg School of Management, Pritzker School of Law, Feinberg School of Medicine, all use their own platform outside of Wildcat Connection. But all in all, this has pages from a broad area of our campus community. It also is linked to our single sign-on security, and I'll share why that matters in a little bit as we go through the management mode. And it really serves two general purposes. The first is when we approach Wildcat Welcome each fall, and the most common question our office gets is, how do I just find a list of all the student organizations at Northwestern? Wildcat Connection is the best answer to that question. We invest quite a bit of time to keep it updated, keep it accurate. Organizations re-register every year on that platform. And this is around the time of year where if an org hasn't re-registered, they haven't been active and they haven't been responsive, we reach out to anyone on behalf of that page that we can. And if we don't hear anything back, we hide it. But for us, it's really important for the pages to have accurate information to help students that are trying to find different organizations connect and get involved. The other piece is it's also an administrative tool, and that's more what we're going to focus on today. How org officers, org advisors, org leadership can use this platform to centralize a lot of things that they might be doing using a lot of different platforms. I always share my role is just to make sure folks know about the platform, that it exists, what it can do. By no means is there an expectation that student orgs limit all of the administrative needs for their org to Wildcat Connection. And so with that, I'm going to briefly change the window that I'm sharing and jump into a demo. Just one moment. All right. Please let me know if you have any trouble seeing my browser window. Hopefully you all are able to see the Wildcat Connection homepage. And there's a few things on this. First off, I'm already logged in using my NetID and password. And and we'll talk about the different levels of access and security in the platform. But when you log in, you should have a home screen that looks like this. Events tab, organizations tab, news and forms. Below, any organizations that you are a member of now or a recent former member of should appear in this section. Down below, there should be a list of the next events that you have access to view. And then similarly, news items or articles that you have access to view. So as I said, we are going to focus on the manage mode, but before I do that, I want to share where some of the personal user account settings are hidden. So up in the upper right corner of the screen, you may see a picture if you've uploaded one or just an initial. If you click that and select account, many of you who advise orgs and are listed as an advisor on the orgs page probably got quite a few emails in the evening of Thursday, September 27, saying, this person would like to be a member of this organization, view. So this is a feature that's always been around, but it suddenly became really popular because we were using this platform to host our virtual organization fair. There were a lot of things we could customize about the fair. And one of the things that we could not was a join now button that students would see alongside an org they were interested in learning more about. So some students, we connected with the student org officers and said, handle that however you wish. You can accept them right away to your roster as a member. You can say, thanks for your interest, send them an email, tell them more details about how to get involved, or you can ignore it. We don't advise it, but many advisors also got that. So if you're looking to change your notifications, after you click your profile, there's a notifications menu. And I encourage everyone to leave the campus and organization notifications highlighted. This is a key way we communicate with advisors in the student org and student community. So there's announcements about annual requirements, registration deadlines, policy changes. Please make sure that that is accepting emails from campus and organization notifications. But down below, this is where you can customize what you're actually getting an email for. And if you want to turn off membership request approvals, because for most organizations, that's not something an advisor is necessarily responding to, go ahead and uncheck that and hit save. And you can also see the other occasions you might get a notification. We're actually going to cover one of those in this session today. Okay, so right now I'm in something that Wildcat Connection refers to as explore mode. So with a NetID and password, I can search through different organizations, their contact information, upcoming events. If I click this 3x3 dot next to my profile picture, I can toggle over to manage mode. And that's where we're going to spend the most of this workshop today. I also have access to something called admin mode. That's limited to just a few folks on campus. So I can run reports for like an organization directory. I can run campus-wide elections and a few other things. But folks who are listed as the advisor for their org on the orgs page should see a manage button. And when you switch to manage mode, this takes you to what they call the action center. Now on your screen, you should see something that looks similar to that home screen in the explore mode with any sort of membership that you have management access for at any level. And what I'm going to do is actually go into an organization that I recently assisted in setting up their roster and share some of the features that they were able to customize for their page. Okay, so as you either search for an org that you have management access for, or more likely click one of those tiles when you're in manage mode, you'll arrive at a screen that looks like this. It just gives you the name, primary contact, and the member number. Quick note, all the primary contact means for purposes of Wildcat Connection is when a student visits an org page and they see a contact button, that's the individual or user who's going to get that email. There's not an expectation that that's like a co-chair or anything, but it's just a automatic feature that comes with every page. In terms of finding the areas that you have access to manage, there's a small menu icon. And when you click it, it reveals a dropdown of all the areas you as an advisor have access to update. And this is where we're going to spend most of our time today. A few things I just want to mention that I don't think we really need to go too deep into. I do encourage every organization to add a few photos to the gallery. That's something a student sees when they're exploring different organizations. It's always nice just to have a couple photos. So I also encourage folks to put any important documents for their organization on here too. Right now, every page is set up so organizations are expected to have a constitution that is downloadable from their page. But anything like, advisor transition docs, student org officer transition docs, you can even upload meeting minutes or anything that you would just not want to lose. This is a place to store documents. Again, I know Northwestern has access to Microsoft Box, Google Drive, Dropbox. There's a lot of places to store files and documents, but this is something that links it to the organization. So as students transition in and out of roles, there's no concern about who had access to log in or edit something. It just stays with this page. Okay, so before we got started, someone actually had a question about this section. So I'm going to start here, and this is the About section. The About area of the page is the content that basically everyone can see when they visit your organization's page. So as an advisor, you ought to be listed in the officers section of the roster with your name and advisor. And if someone clicks it, they can see your email address. But if I just am a student and I'm wondering if there's like a mixed race or multiracial student affinity group at Northwestern, this is the information that I can see. Advisors and other student officers for the organization have access to make updates to this area. This is something that gets updated every year in the annual registration, but we only do a very cursory check on the information that's here. We encourage student orgs to update a mailing or street address to 1999 Campus Drive if they don't have a designated address for their org, which most do not. But if you have a campus facility, like Hillel that has a mailing address, that's perfectly fine. We just discourage people putting like their personal contact info here because it's visible. We encourage groups to put social media links on here. So, these are pretty much all the platforms I can think of. If your orgs are using Facebook, Instagram, if they have another website, you can add that information here. And then down below in the additional information, this is where advisors are also listed. And so we want to make sure that this is updated and this is accurate. And it's a conversation for an advisor and a student org officer to have is whose responsibility is it to update this? If you advise an organization where it seems like there's a really big board and maybe in a year like this year, there are students whose roles, they just don't have as much on their plate as usual, but they're looking for things to do. Designate someone on the board to be responsible for the Wildcat Connection page. And they should be able to make that update. So all officers and the advisor, as I said, should have access to make updates to this screen. Next, I'm going to share some more detail about the roster feature, because I think that is the most underutilized area that has some real benefits. So recently, I invited a lot of students to the roster and also created positions. Again, I know this generally isn't for advisors, but I think it's important for advisors to know how to do this and connect with students on how to do this. So after I click roster, I can invite people. All I need is their email address. And I can copy paste a list in here. It defaults to adding them as a member, but you can also designate a specific role that's been created if someone should be occupying that particular role or title. And then one area I think a lot of student organizations could benefit from is creating positions. So if the org has a board with specific roles, it's very easy to create a position. And I've done some custom ones here. There are some that are system defaults. So for example, an org can't create an advisor position because that's already there. An org can't create a president because that's already there. But let's say, for example, this org is suddenly going to have an archivist. The position type, there's just some rules that kind of apply to it, but in general, these are going to be student organization officers because we're going to designate any sort of management access a user who has this role on the page gets. So all access, advisors should have all access. Otherwise, the access can be customized. And for each area of the org page, you can toggle between just no access, being able to view things, and that's very similar to how Google Drive and Box function in terms of file access, or full access, meaning they can create, update, delete, etc. So there may be some roles that it seems necessary to actually customize some different levels of access, but for the most part, co-chairs, treasurers, advisors have all access. And they can create events, they can create forms, they can see the org finances, but it may be a discussion between an advisor and officer for specific roles and what the responsibilities are that designate what is appropriate access for that. There's two other checkboxes on this screen. One, active. If you're creating it, you probably want it to be active. And then also whether you want the officer and their name to appear on the public roster, and that's about it. Okay. I think that's just about all I wanted to share about positions. I mean, the other benefit is if a student wants to get a quick snapshot of their involvement over the course of their time at Northwestern, a user can run an export and it'll share, a start time and an end time in a specific role. Those times can be edited later on if necessary. They're not fixed. So there's a lot of benefits to using the roster and making it a little bit more specific to your org's needs. The next area I'm going to share is events. And two quick notes before I go into a demo for this. The first is that we are seeing more student organizations use this platform as a place to post events. One benefit is you can designate the level of access to who can see virtual event logon credentials, which is recommended by Northwestern IT. Planet Purple has a very similar level of security where it might require a NetID and password login to see event details. And then the other piece is all events, we're encouraging all student group events to be virtual this term. We know, there's only a small portion of first and second year students that are geographically around campus right now. So in efforts for inclusion and then also health and safety, we're encouraging as many of our student group events to be virtual this fall. That said, if there is an event proposed to have an in-person component, there is a hybrid event request form, and that's available on the SOA website in the planning and event section. Okay, so this group just got back up and running for the first time in at least a year or two. So that's why we don't see like a whole list of old events. But I'm going to create an event. And I'll just do a very quick walkthrough of this. Let's say new member welcome event. This is going to be a social. And then a very brief description. Descriptions can have, I always encourage groups to link it to a Facebook event if they're going to be responding to questions, if there's going to be updates. So if this is like a big speaker event, if registration's required, I encourage folks to put the event on Wildcat Connection. Put anything you would only want the Northwestern community to see on this event. But if you're looking for that reach, you can also link it to where else the event is posted. A group can add co-hosts for the event. It's going to automatically fill in organizations from the database. So let's say SOA is a co-host for this. That'll send SOA event planners a note saying, would you accept this invite to be a co-host? And then some general stuff. We put in start time and end time, and I'm not going to touch it. You can set up an online location. There's a custom box for any sort of instructions folks need to know beyond just getting a URL. And then you add your URL here. So in terms of the security access, this is where it's important. There's 4 levels in the platform. The first is public, and that means these events will come up in Google search results. And those are the ones that are just most susceptible to Zoom bombs and other event planning issues for virtual event planners. The next level is the one that we encourage and is the most common used one for students that are just trying to reach the student population for their events. And it's called Students and Staff at Wildcat Connection. That's just another way of saying net ID and password required. Beyond that, there's 2 other levels. So, it's just only viewable to people from the org that are putting it on. We're not seeing a lot of orgs really use that. They're just using listservs and other communication when they have maybe like an exec meeting, and then by invite only. The other items are a group can filter it by category and they can choose as many as they want. So let's say there's an info session. Because it's a cultural and identity-based group, we can tag that as well. So as students browse the events calendar, they can filter, just like they can filter organization pages. And then this is the stuff that really matters, right? Are you feeding me? Are you giving me stuff? Do I get credit for it? So beyond that, there's an opportunity to post an image alongside your event that appears in the calendar. And then it goes for approval. Now, when I go back to my manage mode screen, advisors ought to be getting emails that there's an event they can approve, and any sort of submissions will also appear here. So you can just click the link in that email, or anytime in manage mode, you can see any events that are waiting for you, as well as forms too, if they require approval. So I imagine students are the ones creating the events, but advisors, please make them aware how simple this really is and the benefits of the security for it. And if you're on approving events, when you look at the details, you can also see, is it set up for general public or is it set up for students and staff at Wildcat Connection? Those are really the features I wanted to focus on today. That about section, the roster section, events and event approvals. There's other features on here that we know are available. Student groups can set up forms to fill out, just like Google Form or any other form builder software that's out there. And again, it links it with the page that is nice. The access can be customized so that, whether it's only members of the org can complete it or only members of the Northwestern community can complete it, there's a benefit to that. And then there's also an elections tool on here. I realize even though we're in an election season, we're not necessarily in a student org election season. So we'll likely be offering another workshop all about student org appointments, elections, and general transitions once we get into a time of year where that's a little more common. The last feature I do want to share, and it's not going to be part of a live demo because I don't want to share any organization specific finances, but this is another occasion for a conversation, even in this virtual environment, between an advisor and an org officer. And hopefully you all can see my visual again. So when you're in manage mode for an org, you may also notice a finance button from that dropdown. This is imported from SOA. And depending on the org, there might be nothing on that screen if they don't have an active account. But anyone that has access to the finance section of the org page can see the transaction history through SOA. Account by account, line by line, transaction by transaction. I think now is a really great opportunity. If you advise a group that has a ledger that looks like this with a whole lot of different account lines, some of them are empty, some of them have a negative balance, some are in the black. It's a great idea to find out from the treasurer or whoever manages the budget for the org, are they clear on the rules and restrictions for each of these account lines? I work with groups all the time that, if they have money, they just keep spending it out of the ASG line, or an unrestricted line. But there might be money left over from a Catalyzer fundraising campaign. There might be money that has some restrictions to it. And we all know that that's the money that should be used first if the expense meets that restriction, rather than funds that are unrestricted. So I think a conversation with whoever manages the budget for the org, and then having some sort of document as folks transition into that role, because I've worked with a lot of orgs and they have rough treasurer transitions, and they log on and they get a screen like this and they're like, I don't know what any of this means. I don't know any of the rules for any of these lines are. So I think the more smooth that transition can be as it concerns an org's finances, the better. So with that, I will open it up for any questions folks have. And we also have a couple folks from the SOA team joining, assisting. Ayelet, are there any questions in the chat, or do you have any questions as we get started here?
I don't see any questions in the chat.
Okay. Advisors, if you have anything, now is the time to ask. In the meantime, I'm actually going to get to a couple announcements. We have a couple more SOA chats events coming up. These are geared a little more towards students versus advisors. Next week, we're going to be talking about fundraising and funding in the org community. There's an ASG allocation funding deadline coming up, and we're going to cover grants and other creative ways students have been fundraising for their org. So I'll also ask if you advise students that have done some creative funding and fundraising, send Ayala their email address and we'll get in touch with them. We're always looking for panelists and folks that can bring some perspective to the discussion. Or at the very least, let your students know these are happening. We'll also tell them in the Friday newsletter. And then Wednesday, November 4th, more important than ever, student org social media tips. So there are some orgs doing some really creative things as outreach to the student org community or just the student community at large. And we're always updating this on our social media accounts, as we'll also be putting a recording of this session on our YouTube account. And then I also wanted to share that there are some groups looking for a faculty staff advisor. So either they're a newer group or they have someone who has since left Northwestern. So if any advisors on this call today feel like they want another group to advise, or they know someone they think would be a good advisor, please get in touch with me. There's also a new group proposal deadline this Friday. So we're excited to welcome some new groups to the community as well.
We have some questions in the chat now.
All right, terrific.
The first one is, could you show the path for getting to the SOFO account?
Absolutely. All right, one moment while I change my screen share. Okay, so I'm going to start from the beginning. I'm logged into Wildcat Connection. And it starts me off in explore mode. I'm going to click this 3x3 dot and switch over to manage mode. On that screen, I will see a list of organizations that I have management access to. So I'll just pick our Bridge Club, our nationally ranked Bridge Club, I should mention. And when I click that, there is a small menu icon on the upper left. And when I click that, it reveals the dropdown, and finance is one of the last items in that list. And so I'm not going to click it because it's their private finances for the org, but that would be where you would find SOFO information and transaction history for the org you advise. They've been able to update it pretty much weekly. It should be accurate to when a student requests a general ledger at the SOFO window. But any questions, you can relate to SOFO on that. The students and the advisor actually don't have any control to change anything in that finance area of the page. They can just view the transaction history, search for transactions. And SOFO also adds in any info from the voucher. So I always encourage treasurers and co-chairs, when you're filling out a voucher, you may need to go back and do a little bit of accounting investigation. Make sure there's good info in there, and you don't just put food, because otherwise it's going to be a lot harder. Orgs, of course, are also keeping their own internal budgets too, just to track everything. So it's good as they approach the end of the term and they reconcile their SOFO account to make sure things match up.
And then a few people were wondering if they turn off the notifications for membership request approvals, will that also turn off their notifications for approving new leaders on Wildcat Connection?
It shouldn't, and I don't believe that a change in a roster member's role to an officer necessarily prompts a notification. So in that case, as orgs have members of their roster change, I think that's definitely a occasion for conversation between the student contact and the advisor to make sure that the advisor is up to date on, is there a new treasurer? And if the meeting's in order for specific roles, then that can be communicated to. But I don't see anything for a notification for, like a member getting their status changed to an officer.
I think that's all the questions in the chat box for now.
All right, perfect. So as I mentioned, I know a lot of folks got membership invites the night of that virtual fall org fair. There's no expectation that advisors are approving these or even looking at them. So if they do get to be kind of burdensome, clicking your picture or initial in the upper right and then clicking account, you can navigate to the notifications tab and uncheck that box so you're not getting those. And I'm happy to stick around. I think I blocked out 3 to 3:45, knowing that this session would probably only run a half hour. But thanks you all for joining. I hope everyone has a great rest of the week. And I'm available for any other questions folks have.